Thank you for coming, Chin Chin. Chin Chin.
After being holed up with no place to go, dreaming of just packing a bag and hopping on a plane, fully vaccinated Australians are joining the rest of the world, lining up to travel. Where to first? Well, let's have a look at where Australians were heading before the pandemic, countdown style, starting with number 10. Fiji. Paradise is calling, and as of the 1st of December, Aussies will be welcome quarantine-free, but will have to take a PCR test before heading home. Singapore is next on the list. Australians over the age of 12 will just need to return a negative COVID test before getting in, and then 2 tests before leaving, one 48 hours prior to travel and another at Changi Airport. After 20 months of closed borders, India has opened up for international visitors. Aussies are on the list that won't need to quarantine and will be allowed to skip a post-arrival COVID test. The land of the rising sun is a bit trickier, with a 10-day quarantine on arrival still in place, but Prime Minister Scott Morrison has flagged that requirement could soon be lifted for vaccinated Australians. Thailand has its doors open to anyone who's fully jabbed and has been in Australia for at least 3 weeks before travelling, but you'll also need to have a travel insurance policy that covers COVID-19. China was a popular destination for Aussie travellers. That might have changed over the course of the pandemic, especially since Canberra has issued a warning that Australians could be arbitrarily detained. Anyone set on going will have to quarantine for 2 weeks on arrival. It's a different story for anyone heading to the UK. No quarantine required, just a test coming and going. The US of A is also welcoming Aussies, also no quarantine required, but anyone over the age of 2 who isn't vaccinated will need to give proof of a negative PCR test no more than 3 days before departure. Australians desperate to go back to Bali can do so, but they'll need to quarantine. Talks are underway to open a vaccinated travel lane. And at the top of the list, New Zealand, which has suspended quarantine-free travel with Australia. Managed isolation is required for a period of 7 days, followed by a period of self-isolation. But for many Australians, it's still easier than getting into Queensland or Western Australia.
To help us navigate all of this, I'm joined by travel writer Ben Groundwater. Welcome to you. Anyone considering an international trip is really going to have to look at the fine print for their destination, their airline and their accommodation.
Yeah, they are. There's so much to look into at the moment. There's so many rules and restrictions. And the thing is, they're constantly changing as well. You know, we've seen how rapidly things have changed in Australia with state borders from day to day. And the same thing is happening with international rules and restrictions are changing all the time. So there's just a huge amount to think about before you go, you know, in terms of what you need to do before you get there, the paperwork you need to have, the insurance you need to have, the accommodation you need to have booked in some instances. It is a bit of a minefield. It's going to be very, very interesting, to say the least, for the next few months, I would say.
Have you got any tips about where people should start when considering booking an international destination?
Look, I think probably a good place to start is the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's website, Smart Traveller. There's a huge amount of information on there now about the country that you're probably wanting to go to and the restrictions that they have in place, depending on when you want to travel. So that's a good spot. I would then go to the embassy or the consulate of the country that you're planning to visit. I would also be looking at, there's various sites that you can go to check things like COVID-19 case numbers, which is a really important thing to factor in as well, because coming back into Australia, you need to take a PCR test to be able to get on that flight back to Australia, which means you have to be negative. And if you're in a country that has a lot of COVID-19 cases, that's a thing to consider, is that you may test positive, which means you may be stuck in that country for a little bit longer than you'd planned to be.
Travellers are probably going to have to take a few COVID tests. Some may have to take a few more. How expensive are they? Are travellers likely to incur the costs of all of them?
Essentially, yes. They can be very expensive, and yes, travellers are likely to incur all of the costs. The thing is, to get into another country, most countries at the moment are requiring a PCR test to be able to fly to those countries, which you have to take in Australia. That doesn't mean just going to a hospital or to a normal government clinic. It means going to a dedicated facility, a facility that is doing these types of tests. They can usually cost about $150. Often in some countries, you have to do another test when you arrive, which can be $150, $200. And then you have to take another test in that country to be able to get on the plane to come back to Australia. So once again, that can be about that much money. Again, there's some countries that are allowing rapid antigen tests, which cost a lot less and are a lot less hassle. But most at the moment are requiring PCR tests. And so that adds up really quickly, particularly if you're traveling with several people or a whole family.
Australian children under the age of 12 can't be vaccinated yet. Will that have implications for their prospects of international travel?
At this point, no. At this point, I don't think there are any countries that are restricting children under the age of 12 who are unvaccinated from coming into the country. Basically, if you're not eligible for a vaccine in this country, which under 12s aren't right now, then you can enter these other countries without a vaccine. Some will have to be tested before they go in. Some will not. In somewhere like Indonesia at the moment, it's a 3-day quarantine period if you want to go in there. But if you're coming in with unvaccinated children under the age of 12, you have to do 5 days. So there are some differences there, but essentially you can still travel with children who haven't been vaccinated.
There's an often repeated saying, if you can't afford insurance, you can't afford to go. Is that even more important now?
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, insurance is a huge issue at the moment that people need to be reading all of the fine print before they make a decision on their policy and on their holiday as well. Because depending on your destination, the price can go up depending on how many COVID cases there are in that country, what medical facilities are likely to cost. But it's a huge thing. There's some policies right now that say they cover COVID, but they only cover cancellations or things that are affected indirectly by COVID. They don't actually cover you if you happen to contract the virus, if you have to stay for longer, if you need medical attention when you're in another country. So there are policies that certainly do cover those things. It's just a case of, as I said, reading that fine print and finding out exactly what you're getting yourself into before you go.
I've got one final question. This could be the most revealing question yet. Have you booked a trip for yourself?
I haven't at the moment. I'm really excited to get back into the world of travel. I'm so excited to reconnect with the world. But right now, I have a lot of responsibilities home. I have young children, and I just can't afford to be stuck in another country if something happens. So I really want to sit back for at least the next couple of months and just see how everything goes, and then make a decision after that. When the time comes, I'll be super excited about it. But right now, I'm just going to take my time and just see what happens.